Good morning students, welcome back to your English class. I hope you all are doing good and have been learning well. So in the previous parts we have learned about chapter 7, the Titanic, and today we will also complete the chapter, that is chapter 7, the Titanic, from your main course book. Okay, so I think we had discussed all the parts of the chapter, which included things like about the Titanic. We learned that the Titanic was a passenger liner which was traveling from Southampton, England to New York City, and it hit an iceberg on its very first voyage, on its maiden voyage, and sank down. Okay, and the Titanic was also believed to be one of the most developed ships of that time, so no one really expected it to sink, but it did, as a result of which hundreds of passengers were on board the Titanic, but as the ship sank, they also died. Okay, and we also learned that when the ship hit the iceberg, the captain of Titanic, who was the captain of Titanic? If you remember, we had discussed Edward Smith was the captain of Titanic, and he had an experience of 26 years of sailing in the ocean. Okay, so he sent distress messages. Okay, like when the iceberg hit the Titanic, the water from all around started gushing inside the Titanic, as a result of which it started drowning or sinking, right? So when the captain realized this, he sent distress messages. Okay, as a result of which, and what were distress messages? Distress messages are signals that are sent from the Titanic to other vessels so that they can come and help the people who were drowning. Okay, and we also learned that the vessels were not close enough to reach before the Titanic was sinking. So there was only this one ship called Carpathia which reached on time and started helping people. If you remember students, the Titanic started its first journey on 10th of April, and 4 days it sailed without any problem. But on the 4th day, that is the 14th of April, it spotted an iceberg, and before they could do anything about it, it had already hit it and had begun sinking. And the help from Carpathia, that also arrived nearly about 24 hours later, that is on 15th of April. On 4:10 am, the Carpathia arrived, started saving people, and could save only 710 people of its all lifeboats up to 8:30 am. And the rest of the part we will be studying today. So we will first have a reading of the chapter, and then we can go on the explanation part. So look here, the Titanic carried only 20 lifeboats, not enough to hold all the passengers and crew. The ship could have steered away from the iceberg had it been not moving ahead at full speed. This proved a fatal mistake. Besides, many passengers refused to move into lifeboats, thinking there was more safety on the ship. Records of the accident indicate that the disaster may well have been avoided had officers on board paid heed to reports regarding the frozen waters they were approaching. Regarding the actual sinking, one of the most well-known and heartwarming fact is about the ship's heroic 8-member band. According to witnesses, they played on while the ship was sinking, totally unmindful of rising waters. So we'll read this. What happened was the Carpathia saved as many people as it could, and rest, the Titanic did not have that many lifeboats on its own to save all the people. Okay, so that is what is said. It carried only 20 lifeboats, and obviously only women and children were onboarded into the lifeboats first. Men had to stay on the sinking ship. So there was very less number of lifeboats, that is only 20 lifeboats, to help the people and to save their lives, as a result of which hundreds of people died due to the sinking of the Titanic. The ship could have steered away. What is the meaning of the word steered away? Steered away, look here students, means moved away. The ship could have moved away from the iceberg had it not been moving ahead at full speed. The moment they discovered that an iceberg was approaching, they could have avoided the accident had they got the time to do so. And why did they not get the time? Because the ship was at its full speed, so did not get the time to change the direction of the ship, as a result of which it crashed with the iceberg and resulted in sinking. Okay, and this proved to be a fatal mistake. Fatal, students, means anything that leads to death. So the speed of the ship being full proved to be a fatal mistake, that is, it led to the death of many people. Okay, I hope this is clear. Let us move to the next paragraph. Besides, many passengers refused to move into lifeboats. They did not want to get into lifeboats. Lifeboats are obviously small boats carried by the larger ones, and many passengers are not clear about it, and hence they did not want to get on the smaller boats, thinking that the Titanic was safer than the lifeboats. Okay, thinking there was more safety on the ship. Records of the accident indicate that the disaster may well have been avoided had officers on board paid attention to reports regarding the frozen waters they were approaching. Okay, so what was the other reason that so many people died was that first, the Titanic did not get the time to change its direction since it was moving with all of its speed, with its full speed. Second, many of the passengers did not want to get into the lifeboats. They thought being on the largest ship, being on the Titanic was safer for them. Okay. Also, there was one more report that suggested that indicated that the disaster could have been avoided had officers on board paid heed to reports regarding the frozen waters. It has also been said that the officers on board did not pay attention to the reports that suggested that they were actually approaching an iceberg. Had they paid attention to the report, they could have done something or the other so that they would not have hit the iceberg, and that would not have led to this much of a disaster. Okay, so that is another thing. And regarding the actual sinking, one most well-known and heartwarming fact is about the ship's heroic 8-member band. Okay, now what was the ship's heroic 8-member band? It was a band of 8 people who were playing music and instruments on the Titanic. Okay, what was interesting about them? According to witnesses, they played on while the ship was sinking, totally unmindful of the rising waters. So according to reports, according to witnesses as in the people who were saved from the Titanic, they said that even when the water was gushing into the ship, even when the ship was sinking, the 8-member band continued playing the instrument and singing and entertaining people, totally unmindful of what was happening, that the ship was sinking. Okay, so that's it about the chapter, students. I hope all of you are clear about it. It's about Titanic. I'll be giving you a brief summary. Let us recall the chapter. It's about Titanic. Titanic was a passenger liner. Where was it traveling from? From Southampton, England to New York City. When did it start its journey? On 10th April. For 4 days it sailed without any problem. After 4 days it spotted an iceberg. Okay, now about the Titanic. The Titanic was one of the most developed ships of that time. It provided services that no other ship provided then. It had electrically operated lifts, wireless operators, and many more things like a gymnasium, a lending library, and all of it that no other ship at that time offered to its passengers. As all of this resulted into the onboarding of hundreds of passengers, and millions of people came to see the ship leave the shore. Why? Because first, it was the first time that this big and developed a ship was onboarding and leaving from the shore. Second, it had carrying passengers which were actors or famous or were most prominent people of that time. Also, what happened after they spotted an iceberg of 14th on April, they did not get the time to move away. Why did they not get the time? The Titanic was moving at its full speed. Okay, so did not get the time to move away from the direction of the iceberg, which resulted into the disaster. Had the Titanic not been moving with full speed, maybe the disaster could have been avoided. Another reason that the disaster was not avoided was, according to reports, there were already indications that the ship is approaching an iceberg, but the officers on board did not pay any attention to the reports. Had they paid heed, had they paid attention to the reports that they were approaching frozen waters, they could have avoided the disaster. Am I clear? Also, what resulted in the death of many people when the ship began sinking? Captain Smith, obviously the captain of Titanic, made an announcement that the ship has hit an iceberg, it is sinking, and they are trying their best, but the ship is still drowning. Okay, so this was an information for all the passengers. Next, what he ordered? He ordered the wireless operators to send distress messages to the vessels nearby. What do you mean by vessels nearby? As discussed, to the ships nearby, to come and help people, to take people from the Titanic and save their lives. But by the time the Titanic sank, only one ship was nearby that could have come and helped the Titanic. That was the Carpathia. Okay, the Carpathia's wireless operator awakened the ship's captain, and he immediately ordered the ship to move towards Titanic. The ship began sinking on 14th of April. The Carpathia reached on 15th of April 4:30 am, saved 710 passengers till 8:30 am, and since there were no more lifeboats left, they had to leave for New York City. Again, still there were many passengers on the Titanic, so the Titanic began using all of its lifeboats, but it had only 20 lifeboats, which were obviously not enough to save so many people. Okay, now since that was not enough, this is what happened. As a result, they died. Obviously, they drowned and died. The Titanic's disaster led to the death of many people. Okay, also what was the reason it was taking so much of a time? The people on the ship were not ready to get into the lifeboats, right? They thought that the Titanic is safer than the lifeboats, so they did not agree to get into the lifeboats, as a result of which they drowned and they died. Okay, I think this is clear. And about the 8-member heroic band, this is an interesting fact that the witnesses suggest, that even though all this chaos was happening, all this disaster was happening, the 8-member band did not stop playing their music. They kept on playing, they kept on singing, unaware, totally unmindful of what was happening around them. So this is about the chapter, students. I hope you all are clear about the chapter. In the next parts, we will be discussing the question answers of chapter 7, the Titanic. Till then, read the chapter, understand it, and keep learning. Thank you so much.